I'm going to be brutally honest with you about something I discovered after spending 5 decades observing how fortunes are made and destroyed. It's not a lack of opportunity that keeps 92% of people trapped in financial mediocrity. It's not a lack of education. It's not a lack of luck. It's not even a lack of initial money. It's something much deeper and much more painful to admit. There are 5 fundamental mindset mistakes that work like invisible handcuffs, and the worst part is that most people don't even realize they are making these mistakes every day. These 5 destructive patterns are so ingrained in the way we've been conditioned to think about money that they seem normal, they seem logical, they even seem prudent. But after building Bridgewater and managing $160 billion through 4 major economic crises, I can guarantee you one thing with absolute certainty. Each of these 5 mistakes is not just a hindrance, it's a silent wealth killer that works against you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, methodically destroying any chance you have of building real wealth. I've seen these standards destroy brilliant engineers, talented doctors, hard-working entrepreneurs, people with high IQ, with discipline, with ambition, but all making the same 5 fatal mistakes. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, subscribe now because what I'm going to reveal in the next few minutes goes against everything your parents, your school, and society taught you about money. But it's exactly what separates those who build generational wealth from those who work their entire lives and end up with almost nothing. The first fatal error that keeps you stuck is what I call the active income as security illusion. Let me explain what this means in practice and why it is so devastating. Most people have been conditioned to believe that having a stable job, receiving a paycheck every month, is the safe and responsible way to live. Your parents probably told you this. Your teachers certainly reinforced it. The entire society is structured around this belief. But here's the brutal mathematical truth that no one told you. When you trade your time for money, you are essentially getting the worst deal possible, because your time is the only truly finite asset you have. You have a maximum of 80,000 productive hours in your adult life, if you count a 40-year career with 2,000 hours per year. That's all. And if you're selling those hours for a salary, even if it's a high salary, you've already lost the game before it even starts. Why? Because active income has an absolute mathematical ceiling. Let's say you're exceptional. You make it to the top 1% of your profession, earning $500,000 a year. Seems like a lot, right? But now, let's do the real math that no one does. Of these 500,000, the federal government takes 37% immediately, leaving 315,000. Your state takes another 10%, leaving 283,500. You need a decent house, that's $3,000 a month, so minus 36,000, that leaves 247,500. You have children, education costs $4,000 a month, minus 48,000, that leaves 199,500. Family health insurance, $1,500 a month, minus 18,000, that leaves 181,500. Car, food, clothes, vacations, unforeseen events, another 50,000 easily, that leaves 131,500. And that's you in the top 1%, working 60 hours a week, sacrificing time with family, health, everything. You can save $130,000 a year in the best-case scenario. Now, here's where it gets really painful. To accumulate $10 million, which is the minimum for real financial independence in the United States today, you would need 76 years of saving that $130,000 per year, assuming you invest and get an average market return. 76 years. But you only have 40 years of career. The math just doesn't add up. It's impossible to get rich selling your time, no matter how expensive you sell it. But the error goes deeper than that. When you rely entirely on active income, you are creating the greatest possible vulnerability. One illness, one layoff, one recession, any disruption to your workflow, and the money stops. Immediately. I saw this happen in 2008, when professionals making $300,000 a year were laid off, and within 6 months they were in an absolute panic because they hadn't built any source of passive income. Zero. All 80,000 hours sold, but no assets generating money while they slept. At Bridgewater, one of the first things I teach is that you should never, ever be in a position to stop. Working means stopping earning. This isn't security, it's a golden prison. But here's where 90% of people get it even worse. They think the solution is to save more, spend less, be more frugal. They cut breakfast, change cars, cancel Netflix, and meanwhile, they spend 40 hours a week selling their only irreplaceable asset, their time, without building anything that generates a return independent of their active work. It's like being in a leaky boat, and instead of filling the hole, you're scooping water with a bucket. It may work for a while, but eventually you sink. The reality that the rich understand and the poor never learn is this. Real money doesn't come from working, it comes from owning. Own assets that work for you. Stocks that pay dividends while you sleep. Properties that generate rent every month regardless of whether you woke up or not. Businesses that have systems functioning without their physical presence. Intellectual property that generates royalties. This is the only mathematically possible way to accumulate real wealth. But most people never take that step because they are too busy selling hours to survive. It's a perfect trap. You need money, so you work more. You work more, so you have less time to build assets. Without assets, you need to work even harder. It's a vicious cycle that ends with you at 65, exhausted, with $500,000 in retirement if you're lucky, relying on Social Security, and praying you don't live long because the money will run out. This is the inevitable mathematical consequence of relying exclusively on active income. It's not opinion, it's simple arithmetic. The second fatal error is even more insidious because it sounds like wisdom but is pure wealth-building poison. This is what I call a preservation mindset, rather than a multiplication mindset. Let me tell you a real story that perfectly illustrates this error. In 2009, shortly after the financial crisis, I met two individuals with exactly the same financial situation. They both had $50,000 saved after years of hard work. They were both 35 years old. They both earned $80,000 a year. Person A decided that the most important thing was to protect these $50,000. He put everything into a CDA paying 2.5% per year. Safe, guaranteed, risk-free. Person B did something that the family thought was insane. He took $40,000 of those $50,000 and invested it in learning a high-value skill, specifically software development and digital marketing, kept $10,000 as an emergency fund. Person A laughed at Person B. He called him irresponsible, risky, a fool for spending his savings. Today, 16 years later, Person A has $83,000. The original $50,000 grew 2.5% a year religiously. She continued working the same job, saving when she could. He's planning to retire at 65 with maybe $400,000 if he's lucky. Person B has $8.2 million in net worth. The $40,000 invested in education turned her into a senior developer, earning $220,000 a year in 3 years. Then she used her digital marketing skills to create digital products that generated $700,000 in the first year. Reinvested in more education and a team. Today, he has a software-as-a-service business generating $140,000 per month in recurring revenue. What was the fundamental difference between these two people? It wasn't luck. It wasn't innate intelligence. It was mentality about what to do with resources. Person A had a preservation mindset. Every dollar was too precious to risk. Person B had a multiplication mindset. Every dollar was a seed that could generate $100 if planted in the right place. And I want to know from you, where are you watching this video from? Leave a comment telling me your city and country, because this pattern of preservation versus multiplication mentality is global, and I want to understand how it manifests in different cultures and economies around the world as people make these choices that determine the rest of their lives. Here is the truth that will hurt, but you need to hear it. When you are poor or middle class, preserving what little you have is the strategy that guarantees that you will remain poor or middle class. Why? Because preservation means low returns. 2% per year in savings account, 4% in government bonds, 6% in an index fund if you're lucky. These returns are not life-changing. With $50,000 up front and saving $5,000 a year at 6%, in 30 years, you have $750,000. It seems like a lot, but with inflation at 3% per year, real purchasing power is $400,000 today. Enough to not go hungry in retirement, insufficient aware of any kind of freedom or legacy. But truly transformative returns, the returns that change social class, that create generational wealth, those require risk. Invest in yourself. Invest in business. Investing in assets when others are afraid. And most people are so terrified of losing what little they have that they never take the necessary step. At Bridgewater, one of the principles I lived by was this: doing it right is not about not making mistakes. It is about maximizing risk-adjusted return, translating from financial jargon into clear Portuguese. If you have little, the biggest risk is not losing what you have. It's not multiplying quickly enough to escape the trap of need. When you only have $50,000, losing $20,000 betting on yourself and failing hurts. But it doesn't destroy you. You can recover in 2 years of focused work. But don't try. Keep $50,000 forever. Guaranteed that you will spend the next 30 years selling time for wages. This is the real destruction. Now, I'm not saying to be reckless. I'm not saying throw everything into cryptocurrencies or the lottery. I'm saying there's a fundamental difference between a stupid risk and a calculated risk that could change your life. Stupid risk is betting on something you don't understand, where you have no control, where the result depends on luck. Intelligent risk is investing in yourself, in skills that the market pays well, in businesses where you understand the dynamics, in assets when you have done your homework. The rich person understands that money is fuel. It is not the goal. It's fuel to create more money. It's fuel to buy time. It is fuel to build systems. The poor person sees money as the ultimate goal, and every dollar saved is a victory, when in fact it is just maintaining the status quo. There is a moment in the financial journey where you need to make a conscious decision. Am I still on the slow and steady path of saving and investing conservatively for the next 40 years? Or do I make a calculated bet on myself, on my ability to create value, knowing that if it works out, I can compress 40 years into 10? Most choose the first option because it seems safer. And that's exactly why most end up in the same financial situation they started in, just 40 years older and much more tired. This preservation mentality comes from deep scarcity. When you grow up broke, when you see your parents struggling, every dollar seems too precious to risk. It's understandable. It's human. But it's also the chain that keeps you stuck in the same place your parents were. Breaking this chain requires the courage to see money differently. See it as a tool, not as a trophy. As a means, not as an end. As something to be put to work aggressively, not something to be guarded defensively. And here is the cruel paradox. The less you have, the more aggressive you need to be, because you don't have the luxury of time and compound interest working in your favor for 40 years. Someone with 10 million can be conservative, invest in bonds at 4%, and live comfortably on 400,000 a year. Someone with 50,000 can't. You need returns of 20, 30, 50% a year in the first 10 years to get out of the hole. And these returns don't come from savings or indexes. They come from betting on yourself, on your business, on opportunities that you created with sweat. The third fatal error that traps people in financial mediocrity is what I call inversion of leverage. It's probably the most devastating mistake of the 5, because people don't just make it. They make it with the conviction that they're being smart. Let me show you exactly what I mean. The average person uses leverage, which is basically debt or third-party funds, to purchase liabilities. New car financed in 5 years. Bigger house you need with a 30-year mortgage. Furniture on credit card in installments. Financed trip. Each of these decisions uses leverage to acquire something that generates no financial return, that actually costs money every month in maintenance, insurance, interest. But that same person is absolutely terrified of using leverage to buy income-generating assets. The idea of taking out a loan to invest in shares, to buy property to rent, to capitalize a business is terrifying. It sounds risky, irresponsible, dangerous. Do you see the reversal? People fearlessly go into debt to buy things that make them poorer every month. But she is afraid of going into debt to buy things that would make her richer monthly. It's completely backwards logic, and it's destroying any chance of building wealth. I'll give you a concrete example to show the mathematics of this insanity. João has a stable job earning $7,000 a month. He buys a new truck worth $60,000, finances it in 60 months at 6% per year. Monthly payment of $1,160. In 5 years, he will have paid a total of $69,600 for an asset that at that time will be worth perhaps $30,000. Loss of $39,600. But João feels good about this decision because everyone does it. It's normal. It's acceptable. Now, the same situation, but João takes this $60,000 and uses it as a 30% down payment on a $200,000 rental property. He finances $140,000 at 4% in 30 years. Mortgage payment is $668 a month, but tenant pays $1,400 in rent. After paying mortgage, property tax of $200 per month, insurance of $100 per month, maintenance of $150 per month, net profit of $282 per month remains. In 5 years, João received $16,920 of positive cash flow, paid $21,000 of the mortgage that is now his equity, and the property appreciated by an average of 3% per year, now worth $231,850. His total equity is $112,850 in a property that he controls with just $60,000 up front. 88% return in 5 years, plus $16,920 in cash flow. But John would never do that because it seems risky to use debt to invest. So he buys a truck, loses $40,000, and feels safe. Meanwhile, his cousin Pedro, who understood leverage correctly, used the same money to build $112,000 in equity and generate passive income. In 10 years, Pedro has 6 properties, equity of $480,000, monthly cash flow of $3,200. João has an old truck worth maybe $12,000, and he works until he's 65. This is the difference between using leverage to get poor and using leverage to get rich. And it's not an exaggeration. It's not a theory. It's exactly what I've seen happen hundreds of times. At Bridgewater, we manage $160 billion using sophisticated leverage. Not because we are foolhardy, but because we understand a fundamental truth. Leverage amplifies results. If you use good assets that generate a return greater than the cost of the money borrowed, you get richer faster. If you use it on bad liabilities or assets, you get poorer faster. It's a neutral tool, but most people use it in the wrong direction. The poor person uses leverage to artificially increase their standard of living. Bigger house, better car, better vacations, all on credit. She feels like she is living well, but mathematically, she is digging a deeper hole every month. A wealthy person uses leverage to acquire assets that generate cash flow greater than the cost of debt. He may live in a modest house, drive an old car, but he is building an empire of income-generating assets. In 10 years, the difference is abysmal. Now here's the part that really separates those who understand money from those who don't. Leverage timing. There is a right and wrong time to leverage. The right time is when assets are cheap, when others are afraid, when you are clear about generating returns. In 2009, after the crisis of 2008, properties were 30 to 40% cheaper, banks were desperate to lend, interest rates were historically low. It was the perfect time to take advantage of real estate. Whoever did it became rich. In 2020, after the COVID crash, the stock market fell 34% in 1 month. Solid companies were for sale at an absurd discount. Perfect time to leverage on shares. Those who did this doubled their wealth in 2 years. But the average person does the opposite. When assets are cheap and everyone is afraid, she is afraid too and does not act. When assets are expensive and everyone is euphoric, she gets excited and buys at the top, often with debt. It's a perfect combination for wealth destruction. Wrong leverage timing. What I learned from managing money through 4 crises is this. Debt is not the enemy. Misused debt is the enemy. Debt for consumption is poison. Debt for investment in return-generating assets is rocket fuel. And the vast majority of people have this completely backwards. They see consumer debt as normal and acceptable, but investment debt as dangerous and irresponsible. It's the world upside down. But here's the last point about this, which is the most important. You can't use leverage safely if you don't have financial education and an understanding of cash flow. Leverage in the hands of the ignorant is dynamite. Leverage in the hands of those who understand is a lever that moves mountains. So the correct sequence is: first, educate yourself about assets, return, cash flow, risk. Second, build small debt-free startup capital. Third, use this capital as a down payment to leverage into assets that you understand profoundly. Fourth, manage cash flow religiously so you never end up exposed. Fifth, reinvest profits into more assets. Most jump straight to the third step without doing the first and second and explode. That's why he's so afraid of leverage. They only saw the disaster. They didn't see the preparation that was lacking. The fourth fatal error is subtly destructive because it disguises itself as a virtue. This is what I call work as identity rather than work as means. Most people define who they are by what they do. I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I am an engineer. The profession becomes a central identity. And with that comes deadly trap. If work is who you are, then to stop working is to lose who you are. This creates psychological dependence on continuing to work, regardless of whether it makes financial sense. I've seen it destroy doctors who could have retired at 55, but stayed until 75 because they didn't know who they were without the job. I saw executives making $400,000 a year in jobs they hated, but unable to leave because their entire identity was tied to the job. This error is particularly cruel because society reinforces it. Hard work is a virtue. Total dedication to your career is admired. People who work 60 or 70 hours a week are seen as committed, while someone who works 20 hours and spends the rest of the time with family or building passive assets is seen as lazy. But here's the truth I discovered after building a business that works without me. Work should be a means to achieve life goals. It should not be the life goal itself. Your goal is not to work until you are 65. Your goal is to live a full life, have time for what matters, and have the resources to do what you want. Work is a tool to get there. It is not the destination. But when work becomes identity, you never ask the right questions. How much money is enough for me to stop? What do I really want to do with my time if money is no object? How can I structure life to maximize freedom, not maximize salary? Instead, you stay on the endless treadmill of wanting the next promotion, the next raise, the next title, because that's what validates who you are. And this search for validation through work has a brutal compounding cost. You sacrifice health by working 60 hours a week. You sacrifice relationships because you are always busy. You sacrifice experiences because long vacations are seen as a lack of commitment. You sacrifice opportunities to build real wealth because all your time is tied up selling hours for paychecks. And in the end, you're 65, finally free to do what you want. But you're too old, too tired, and you've discovered that you no longer know what you want because you spent 40 years defined by work. It is a silent tragedy that is repeated millions of times. Let me tell you about a partner I met in 1997. Brilliant guy, Harvard MBA, worked in investment banking, making $350,000 a year at 32 years old. He came to me for advice because he was being recruited for a position that would pay $550,000, but would require moving to London and working 80 hours a week minimum. I was in doubt. I asked one thing. How much do you need to feel financially independent? He thought, and said that with $5 million he could retire comfortably. I said, okay, you have $600,000 saved now. If you continue in your current job, save $150,000 a year, invest at 8%, which is the historical market return. In 17 years, you will have $5 million. You will be 49 years old. If you take the new job, you will save $250,000 a year by working 80 hours. You reach $5 million in 12 years at 44. 5 years earlier, but working 80 hours a week, including weekends. Is it worth exchanging 5 years of youth for 1,600 extra hours of work per year, totaling 8,000 hours of your life that never come back? He looked at me surprised because he had never done this calculation. He always thought that more money was obviously better. He didn't think about the real cost in life lived. He ended up turning down the offer, continued his job, but more importantly, he started investing heavily in real estate and side businesses on the weekends. At the age of 46, he had $8 million in assets, $4 million in real estate generating passive income of $120,000 per year. He retired and now spends 6 months a year traveling with his wife. The fundamental difference was that he stopped seeing work as an identity and started seeing it as a means. Banking work was a means of generating capital. Real estate was a means of generating passive income. Side businesses were a means of building assets. Everything was a means, not an end. And with this clarity, he made completely different choices than he would if he were seeking validation through title and salary. At Bridgewater, I've always said that the first principle is to know what you want and why. Most people never ask this question deeply. They want more money, but don't know how much is enough. They want success, but have not defined what success means. They want security, but haven't calculated how much they need to feel safe. Without these clear answers, you are forever chasing more, and more is never enough, because it is an ill-defined moving goal. But when you do the hard work of answering these questions, everything changes. You realize you don't need 10 million, you need 3. You don't need to be a CEO, you need flexibility and autonomy. You don't need to work until you're 65, you need to generate $60,000 a year in passive income until you're 45. Suddenly, goals become concrete, achievable, and you can make a real plan to get there. But if work is your identity, you never ask these questions because the answers would force you to admit that you are working much more than you need to. And no one wants to admit that they wasted 10 years of their life pursuing something they didn't need to pursue. The consequence of this error compounds over decades in a devastating way. You go from 30 to 50 on the treadmill, always promising that you'll slow down after the next promotion, after the next bonus, after paying off the house. But that later never comes because the goal always moves, and when you finally reach 60, 65, you realize that you have money, but you don't have health, you don't have energy, you don't have deep relationships because they've all been neglected for decades. You traded the best decades of your life, from 30 to 50 when you have energy and health, for money that you will only use